The park is unique, it's aesthetically beautiful, but it was a warm place and it was in the center of town and people going by would stop to see the games.
Rosie, could I see her?
Oh no, I don't think so. Oh, I don't think so.
It's like a Norman Rockwell painting in the summer when you see little kids running around and parents pushing baby carriages.
It's like the kitchen of a house. You know, everybody gathers at the kitchen. This is our kitchen in Easton.
Hello, I'm David Ames. Welcome to Frothingham Memorial Park. Frothingham Park has a rich history. This is a story of how a gift grew to become an important part of Easton's history, with the help of a few extraordinary people who touched many lives along the way. And for a lot of you, your friends and neighbors, this is a place with a lot of special memories. Our look at what has become this special place in Easton's heart and history begins with my great-aunt Mary Ames.
Mary Shreve Ames was born in Easton on February 1st, 1867. She was the fourth of 6 children of Frederick Lothrop Ames and his wife Rebecca. Her great-grandfather was Oliver Ames I, the founder of the shovel shop. The Ames shovel shop employed most of the men in the village of North Easton. At one point during the 19th century, it produced 3/5 of the world's shovels. Mary's father was a treasurer of the shovel company and a successful financier in his own right. At one time, he was considered one of the richest men in the United States. Langwater, a 15-room mansion built by Frederick Lothrop Ames in 1859 and visible from Main Street, was Mary Ames's childhood home.
We usually think of Mary Ames as forceful and 40, but here's where she grew up. Tutored in this house by people brought in by her father, but playing out here in this wonderful yard, playing hide and seek with her brothers and sisters among the branches of this wonderful weeping hemlock tree.
As a young woman, there was no stopping Minnie Ames. She applied her considerable energies, intellect, and generosity to a number of causes. Especially near and dear to her heart was the Red Cross.
She became very interested in that through Clara Barton. They were friends for their entire lives. And she organized the Red Cross before World War I, actually set up a headquarters in the old First National Bank of Easton, which was located on Main Street at the time. And she continued in that role through World War II, where at Frothingham Memorial Hall, they actually made various garments for the soldiers and sailors. According to what I understand, she never actually sewed or knitted, but she loved to pick up all the thread on the floor of the Frothingham Memorial Hall. Unfortunately, I don't think there's a picture of her on the floor picking up the needles, but you can just imagine this lady very much involved on her hands and knees getting the material that the various ladies had stopped and dropped by accident. She also became active politically, encouraging that they not extend the suffrage to women. She organized the Massachusetts chapter, was president of the Massachusetts opposition to extension of suffrage, and she was involved at the national level. So that this was definitely a lady who was politically active, but also community-based and did a number of things in the community as a young woman.
Frederick Lothrop Ames died suddenly in 1893. So while young Mary Ames was giving so much of herself to the community, she was also caring for her mother. Mary stayed on at Langwater until her mother passed away 10 years later. In 1912, at the age of 40, Mary Ames built her own home on Elm Street, calling it Wayside. If you've registered to vote, gotten a license, or paid taxes in Easton, then you've visited Wayside, which has served as the town offices since 1961. On May 8, 1916, 4 years after moving into Wayside, Mary Ames married former Massachusetts Lieutenant Governor Lewis Adams Frothingham.
We do know that there were many young men interested in Miss Ames, but according to her relatives, she never found the right one until she met Lewis Adams Frothingham. They were a dynamic power couple. For instance, near the end of World War I, Governor Hall asked that the Frothinghams and two other couples go to Paris, establish a residence, and be a support team for the Massachusetts young men and women who were in the service in Paris. They rented a home, and according to what I understand, they not only entertained the Massachusetts soldiers, sailors, etc., but they actually went to the trenches to encourage them. When he decided to run for Congress from the 14th District, which included Easton, she became the head of the Women's Republican Club of Easton. And would you believe 90+% of the women of Easton voted? And we assume they voted for Mr. Frothingham.
Lewis and Mary Frothingham would have only 12 years together. A prominent figure in Massachusetts politics for decades, an author and philanthropist, 57-year-old Lewis Frothingham died on August 23, 1928. Shortly after his death, Mary Frothingham began the search for a suitable memorial to her late husband. Meeting with the Easton School Committee in 1929, she was told athletic facilities were badly needed. At that time, the school's baseball and football teams were playing at the Plains, the old Revolutionary War training ground on Lincoln Street, now known as Militia Park. Seeing a need and wanting to create a living memorial that would benefit the town, Mrs. Frothingham set about building a park that would have all the modern facilities the Plains lacked, and would, in her words,
allow generations of young people to develop their character in the tradition of my husband.
In addition to meeting that important need of the town, the park became the suitable memorial my aunt had been looking for. Many felt that Congressman Frothingham had lived his life in the best tradition of the fair play and sportsmanship which he'd learned in the playing fields of his youth.
Congressman Frothingham was also Captain Frothingham of the Harvard baseball team as a junior and senior. An outstanding athlete, he had been one of the best second basemen of his era. During his senior year, the Harvard baseball team went undefeated. Congressman Abram P. Andrews of Massachusetts said of Lewis Frothingham in a memorial address after his death,
"He played fair with his associates and rivals in the political field, just as he had with his teammates and opponents on the gridiron or diamond in his student days. He practiced no subterfuges, he knew no tricks, he was a good sportsman all the way through."
On July 2, 1930, the construction of Frothingham Park began on 10 acres of land between Center and Sheridan Streets. Mrs. Frothingham purchased most of the property that would become the park from the estate of Josiah Goward.
The land upon which this park was built was originally a couple of ponds. There was an ice house on it, there was a slaughterhouse on it. The ponds were in terrible condition. They reeked. This was essentially a wasteland in the middle of town.
Steam shovels were brought in, bulldozers. This was the first time such heavy equipment had been used so extensively in Easton. Kids from all over the northeastern area came to watch. It was a great rubbernecking opportunity.
Well, I can remember as a kid coming up here when they were doing the construction, and the thing that sort of impressed me was this field here, but it was pipes, the drainage system here, and then of course the houses up here where Jack Mason lived. Used to be the pigsties were there, and this was really sort of a swamp, and it certainly developed.
And it developed because of Mary Frothingham's determination to make her husband's memorial the best park in New England. High on her priority list was a playground for the younger children. Joseph Lee, the president of the Playground Association of America, was hired to come up with a design. The Stone and Webster Company, the builders of Harvard Stadium, were brought in to do the work of creating Frothingham Memorial Park.
I recall as a kid the great redwood trim around the track, and the drain covers were all covered with cork. It was built to the highest standards at the time. It had to have been one of the premier parks with an open checkbook. It was done very, very well.
Frothingham Park was built with an eye towards Easton's future growth. When it was completed with the track and 2 tennis courts, the high school didn't have a track or tennis team. In fact, very few people in Easton were playing tennis at the time. But that would change very quickly with the opening of the courts near the Day Street Gate.
Frothingham Park cost $98,785.05 to build. It was a big day right here on September 27, 1930, when the opening ceremonies were conducted.
Hundreds of people turned out for the dedication of Frothingham Memorial Park. It was one of the biggest gatherings the town had seen in years. And like most other big events that would follow in the park, Connie Spillane, the man who would become Frothingham's Mr. Baseball, was there.
When the park opened back in 1930, they had a ceremony over there, and I was about a 18-year-old kid. I was standing out here, all the crowd was over there. Reverend Leonard from the Unity Church opened the thing, and Father Doran of the Immaculate Conception, he closed it with benediction, and in between there was a half a dozen politicians making speeches.
There were indeed prayers. A thank you to Mrs. Frothingham from the Board of Selectmen for her generous donation. And a speech was given by Herbert Parker, who was the state's Attorney General during Louis Frothingham's tenure as Speaker of the Massachusetts House. If you go into the playground area, you will see a large boulder. On it, you'll find the bronze plaque that was unveiled that day. The baseball diamond was not quite ready on opening day, so the first game in Frothingham Park was held a couple of weeks later. Connie Spillane, who would go on to become the coach of the Easton Huskies, played that day. More than 70 years later, he can still remember that first game.
I was on the Knights of Columbus team, and we played the Lincoln AC. We were the 2 top teams, and the KSC had a terrible day that day, and we got thumped about 11-3 or something.
Did you get a hit?
No.
What position did you play?
I was playing right field that day because I was the youngest guy on the team. When you're the youngest guy on the team, they always make you play right field.
Frothingham opened with the country in the midst of the Great Depression. The shovel shop, the town's major employer, was able to help many Easton residents through some tough times.
Easton did not experience the Depression as severely as many other places because people still needed shovels. Not as many shovels, not as many fancy shovels. And one of the great things that the company did was that if they laid off people, they tried to find other employment. For instance, my husband's dad was laid off, but he was employed as a gardener at one of the estates.
People in those days, they were limited in where they could go. I mean, it was during the Depression and its recovery. And there wasn't that much money around. There weren't the automobiles for people to go to other places. Once in a while, we might get a ride down to Nantasket Beach or something like that. But there was no place for people to go. And having that park available, many, many people would come over there and nights and weekends and summer, bring a family out, bring the kids over to play in the park. They'd have picnics over there.
A key to the park's early success was Mrs. Frothingham's choice of a young Boston University graduate named Jack Mason to be the park's first superintendent.
He was very devoted to the park, I know that, and tried to create a nice place for everyone.
Pop Kearney was his right-hand man, and he mowed the grass and kept the infield in good shape and everything for us playing baseball.
In a time without Little League, soccer, or any other activities for Easton's children outside of school sports, one of Jack Mason's most important roles was as an organizer of sports and games.
When I was about 8 years old, I came to the park every day during the summertime. And we'd be here by 8 o'clock in the morning. At 8:15, Mr. Mason would call out of his bedroom window or the bathroom window to get the baseball equipment out of the shed and to start a pickup game. We'd start our game and he'd be out at approximately 8:45. And at that time, if you made a mistake, an error, or missed a fundamental, he would correct you and tell you how to do it properly. And he would do this each and every day. And we'd play until approximately 11:45. At 11:45, we'd put away the equipment, run back home, eat lunch, come back to the park by 1, and at 1 o'clock, he'd greet us on the basketball court, where we'd once again start with the fundamentals of basketball. And we'd play until 3:30. At 3:30, we'd run up to Flyaway Pond, go skinny dipping, and run back home until 5, and then we would eat between 5 and 6 and be back at the park by 6 o'clock. At 6 o'clock, when we came back to the park, we'd be able to play baseball, basketball, tennis, and on occasion, he would teach us how to swing a golf club.
There were just too many kids and too little time for Jack Mason. So in 1934, Rita Mahoney was hired. She was the first of a number of young women who treated the park's smaller visitors to games, stories, and those famous weenie roasts. One of those women, Pat McCann DeCoste, would later become a park director. All were important members of the park staff from 1934 until the late 1960s, when the Recreation Commission took over recreational programming at the park. Jack Mason taught history and coached at Oliver Ames while he ran the park. Mason died in 1961, leaving a lasting impression on many people, including Dick Kent, one of Easton's finest high school athletes of the 30s.
Jack was very good. He coached our baseball team and our football team. And he started the tennis leagues in the town, actually. But he was, we had him, my 4 years in high school, we had him for both baseball and football. And of course, it was a different game back then, but he wasn't the professional coach, but he was good enough to devote his time. He had a good athletic background. I don't know which college. I thought he came from Bowdoin or somewhere up in that area. I'm not sure. But
University of Maine, but I'm not.
Was it Maine? Yeah.
Okay.
But no, he was very good, buddy, and he was very interested in the park.
In his first executive director's report, Jack Mason added up the participants in all that year's activities. He estimated that in 1931, there were more than 51,000 visits to the park. If you consider that the town's population was only about 5,000, you can appreciate how important the park was to Easton at that time. Jack Mason served Frothingham Park and the people of Easton for more than a quarter of a century. His importance to the park and the people whose lives he touched is still being felt today.
Well, I think what you see of Jack Mason is rather intangible. I think he left a deep respect for the community, for the young people he dealt with. He was very sympathetic to them. He was very fond of them. And he was, in many ways, I know in my own case, if you needed a few tennis balls to play or any equipment, he would have it available for you. He oversaw a lot of the tournaments that he had. He developed them. And he was a person who was really, really dedicated not only to the park and the purpose of the park, but to the young people who were a part of it. That was his legacy.
The night before Mr. Mason died, Mrs. Mason, Joan, and he presented my wife and I with a shower for our wedding. And it was a wonderful situation, beautiful evening. And Mr. Mason and I spent the entire evening in the kitchen talking about old times. We discussed all of the park events in my growing up and all of his baseball events and so forth. And when I was a freshman, I played for him. I played on the varsity. And I did get into a couple of games and pitched. And he was responsible for my beginnings in baseball and led me into teaching. And I am, to this day, grateful for his addition to my life.
Going out the Day Street Gate and up Barrow Street, you'll find Frothingham Memorial Hall. Originally the Anna C. Ames Gymnasium, it was built in 1902 by the wife of Governor Oliver Ames to house both the physical education and music programs for the high school across the street. The gym fell into disrepair after her death in 1917, and Mrs. Frothingham bought the building in 1920. Louis Frothingham, who served as the first commander of American Legion Post 7, one of the first in the country, held Legion meetings there. In 1930, Mrs. Frothingham leased the newly renovated gymnasium to the corporation running the park for $1 a year. Frothingham House became an important extension of the park, providing a much-needed place to meet for the many social groups that were thriving in Easton at the time.
Well, every group from the Ancient Order of Hibernians to the Knights of Columbus to women's clubs like the Clover Club, Red Cross, all met here.
Alice Howard and Mary Nolan have some special memories of Frothingham Hall.
It was heaven. It was heaven. I remember going to a dance one day up at the hall, and my partner was Leroy Hegg, and boy, could he dance. My God, we danced all over that room. It was just fantastic.
We did have our class reunion there, and because Mr. Basin was our class advisor, and it was a time of gas shortage, so they couldn't get the gas to go on any trip. So we went over there, and then Mr. Mason got enough stamps or whatever we had to get the gas, and we went to bowling in Brockton, 1942.
Oh, I met my husband there. It was great. Well,
you met your husband?
Well, I don't know. One day I happened to be in the building there, and I see this guy across the hall. I said, oh, he looks great to me. So he looked at me, and I looked at him, and it was a dance all the way until we got married. It was wonderful.
Easton found out about World War II by radio. There was no CNN, no television, but the radio networks were the equivalent of the day. Early on Sunday afternoon of December 7th, the town had already heard, and they were shocked.
Frothingham Memorial Park and the Hall became a big part of the town's contribution to the war effort. In his 1942 report, Superintendent Jack Mason writes,
The park has been used by the Home Guard for drilling purposes, and last summer, the Civilian Defense Committee put on a splendid bomb demonstration.
We had our civilian defensemen, and make sure you had your lights out at a certain time at night. And, what else?
Had to make sure the shades in the house were all the way down. There were no lights at all showing from the street.
Of the war effort at Frothingham Memorial House, Mason writes,
We have been called upon to supply a large number of war activities. We have been able to take care of every request, and I feel that if it is necessary to curtail our regular program, it should be done if it helps the war effort. The Red Cross now uses the building 2 days a week. All the draft registrations have been held with us, as well as canning demonstrations, first aid courses, motor corps meetings, and during the first year, the medical center was moved there. It is also the canteen center and has been used several times by the Red Cross canteen to prepare food for the home guards. Plans are now underway for a home nursing course to be given in the near future. With this most terrible of wars upon us, I know that the Frothingham Memorial is doing and will continue to do everything possible to help.
Overseas, Easton's soldiers often wrote letters to Jack Mason.
They wrote and told him that they couldn't wait to get home, and also that for them, Frothingham Park was Easton. It was the heart of the town, the heart of their experience.
Nice hit. The Easton Huskies were formed in the summer of 1940. But when the war broke out, most of the players joined the service. Connie Spillane was one of the founders of the Huskies and coached the team for 33 years. Almost none of those early Huskies were quite sure why Connie called the team Huskies.
Don't ask me where it came from. He just decided they're going to be the Eastern Huskies. Whether or not he was thinking of Northeastern University at the time, I don't know, but he liked the word Huskies. And I think perhaps he liked the persona of the animal itself.
Well, I don't know really where it came from. We just picked it out of the hat, but the best one I've got is I hit a ball out there one day, and some dog come out of the woods there and chased the center field, and the ball went out for there, and I got a home run on it, and it turned out the dog was a Husky, so I figured we may as well be the Eastern Huskies.
Are you kidding me?
Well, I don't know.
After the war, the Huskies picked up right where they left off. And over the years, they have become an important part of what helps to make Frothingham Park a special place. When the team didn't have games, players helped organize and run activities in the park like field days. For 11 years, the Huskies also had a football team. In 1954, 6'2", 212-pound Ken McAfee, a star with the Huskies, went on to an 8-year career in the NFL, playing for the New York Giants, Philadelphia Eagles, and Washington Redskins.
Tell me, would there have been a Huskies if this park wasn't here? Do you think there would have been a Huskies if there wasn't a
I doubt it.
Jack Mason was instrumental in having this basketball court added to the park's facilities in the early 1940s. Since then, there have been many hard-fought basketball games played here, and I imagine you may have played in a few yourself.
In the 1940s, there was one game no one who was there will ever forget. It didn't happen on the new basketball court. Instead, it was over on the baseball diamond. Buddy Worcester, who was there that day, recalls what happened.
In May of 1941, Easton Police Officer Francis O'Neill was umpiring a ball game between Foxborough High and Oliver Ames High. Somewhere in the middle innings, he stood up, called timeout, removed his mask, and plunged forward into eternity.
In spite of O'Neill's untimely death from his sudden heart attack, life went on in the park. In 1946, the iron fence that rings the park was put up. 1946 was also the first year for the American Legion baseball team that continues to use the park today. 2 years later, Mrs. Frothingham signed over the deed to the Frothingham Memorial House to the corporation that runs the park. And in 1948, facing mounting expenses, it was decided to increase the room rental fee to $4. Use of the kitchen would now cost $1. Frothingham Memorial Park closed out the 40s by celebrating its 20th anniversary. Easton was growing as the city moved to the suburbs along Route 138. Close to 6,500 people were now calling the town home. On Main Street, O'Connor's was the place to pick up a paper and hear what was going on. And at least some of the talk at the Main Street landmark in 1951 was probably about the new game in town. Little League Baseball had come to Easton and Frothingham Park. A small diamond was built near the Sheridan Street gate, and 4 teams, the Huskies, Lions, Pioneers, and Fernandez, took the field for the first season. That small field helped bring the town together in a big way. For many of the young players from North and South Easton, Unionville, the Furnace, Pequannock, and Eastondale, it was the first time they played with and against boys from other parts of town. Gil Haino was a shortstop and pitcher for the Lions Club.
The biggest thrill probably was the parade coming into the Frothingham Park on opening day. They made quite a big deal out of it. We paraded around the whole track. It's the only time you play with a baseball. I mean, normally it was a taped up ball that you played with all, playing down here as just a group of kids. And the thrill was to actually use the equipment and have the proper bat, have a bat without screws and tape on it. It was a great feeling.
While Gil Haino and the other Little Leaguers were running the bases, Jack Mason was running the park with an eye on the future. In his annual report for 1955, Mason wrote,
"With the large increase in our school attendance, it is possible that, before long, our graduation exercises will be held there."
An event Mrs. Frothingham would never get to enjoy in her beloved park.
The park and the town suffered a great loss on May 5, 1955, when Mary Shreve Ames Frothingham died.
Frothingham Memorial Park represents the spirit of Mary Ames Frothingham, and that's where her spirit is. She would be deeply impressed and pleased with what has happened and the sense of community that it has given to all of us.
After Mrs. Frothingham's death, Elise Ames Parker, her niece, became president of the park. Mrs. Parker had been a member of Frothingham's board of directors since the park opened. Her father, Oliver Ames, the oldest son of Frederick Lothrop Ames, built the sheep pasture estate on Main Street, which the Parker family later donated to the Natural Resources Trust. Like her aunt, Elise Ames Parker was dedicated to Frothingham Park and to Easton, making many generous contributions to the town. And in the mid-50s, Frothingham Park was becoming home to a high school football powerhouse led by a Notre Dame grad from Concord who came to town in 1953. Valentine P. Muzzy Moscato's teams would run up an impressive 111, 58, and 10 record.
I don't think anyone can really follow Val Moscato. I think it's a very difficult thing to do.
Moscato's oldest son, Craig, is now the head coach of the Tiger football team his father brought to Frothingham Park for 20 seasons.
He loved this park, and I know in conversations with him before he died that he'd rather see every sporting event in town at Frothingham Park rather than Val Moscato Stadium, but he couldn't say that, and I probably shouldn't say it today, but he had a great affinity and love for this park.
The success of Val Moscato's teams made Frothingham the center of town on Saturday afternoons during football season.
I think the best memory of the park that I have, other than coaching and so forth, is being a spectator at the Saturday football games. It was just an unbelievable family event, a 1 o'clock surety that everybody in town would be at the park. Jack Lount's car would be parked behind the east goal post, and it was just heaven.
Talk to anybody who filled these stands on those Saturday afternoons, and they will tell you about the sound of the team coming down from the high school. And if you listen closely, you might still be able to hear the Tigers on Park Street.
That was a real good intimidation factor, I thought, from a point of keeping score when I was younger to doing it myself coming later, and that was real tradition.
All the people and the anticipation, waiting to come through that gate over there, it was great.
Across the top row, Hank Steinberg, Gil Haino, and John Coe. And sitting just below them are Ed Lemish and Bob Cleary. Football stars who came through that gate to play in front of the Frothingham faithful.
Fantastic place for a football game. This place was mobbed.
It was something special because the park represented years and years, from the 30s probably on when the park was founded, represented years of tradition, and you were told to remember that tradition that you were playing under.
I think all of us probably had Randolph as our Thanksgiving Day. And my senior year, it was a 10 o'clock game, and at 9 o'clock, we probably had about 5 inches of rain. It was an absolute deluge. And Val even called my house up and said, "What do you think?" And as a running back, you don't want to play in those conditions. But he didn't want to hear that. He'd already made up his mind we were going to play. I like to go back up there. And when you talk about the Frothingham, in 60 we went 9-0. In 61 we went 7-2. One thing, when you win here, after the game, it's like everyone is involved. It was just a great feeling.
It was electric to get out here and just play for the team once you got to that high school time and have that opportunity to get on that field. And it was different. Frothingham was different from the steps coming out here. And I think the other teams recognized that home field advantage was huge here, absolutely huge.
Muzzy's Frothingham teams won 6 Hockomock League titles and shared a 7th. His Tigers also captured 3 divisional state championships, and 4 of his teams went undefeated. In the 1950s and 60s, the only thing increasing faster than the football team's winning record was Easton's population. The town that was shopping at Fernandes and stopping at Dog and Suds would grow from 6,200 in 1960 to over 9,000 by the end of the decade. Easton's schools, which used the park for all athletic and physical education activities, experienced a population explosion, with the number of students almost doubling from a little more than 1,000 in 1950 to 2,334 in 1960. The 60s brought with it new problems as well as challenges for the park and Frothingham Memorial Hall.
The park's problems in the 1960s came because there were 30 years of wear and tear. Society was also changing. The Vietnam War, the drug culture, caused a tremendous decline in respect for institutions like the park. So there was some vandalism, there were some problems, and they needed to be addressed. The hall's use declined in the 1960s because Easton itself was changing. The hall had served as a great place to walk to for events, but because Easton was spreading into Southeastern and in the Furnace, people had automobiles and could go any place. They didn't have to come to Northeastern. The other thing was TV. Staying home and watching TV became an alternative to going out to the clubs that were held at the hall.
The Tigers that prowled this field were not just baseball and football players. For decades, Frothingham was home to the women's field hockey and softball teams.
At the park, the Tigers could not be tamed. The field hockey teams won close to 80% of their games at Frothingham and Hockomock League championships in 1966, 67, and 68. On the softball field, it was more of the same, as the 1966, 67, and 68 teams went undefeated at the park.
We always had the edge when we were here. So our big games were really nice because we knew we had the edge. And I think that's why we were such a winning team. All 3 years, all the time I was at high school, we won every game we played here. Whether it was softball or field hockey.
While Frothingham provided an edge, the field hockey and softball teams also had outstanding coaches in Betty Barrows, Dolores Smith, and Sue Rivard.
Using this park was such a treat because the other schools that we played against would come into this facility and would be in absolute awe of one of its beauty, one of its condition of the fields, and I think they were kind of awestruck.
They might disagree a bit on where things used to be in the park, but most of the women who played for Sue Rivard probably wouldn't disagree with Debbie Cole-Luke's feelings about their coach.
I think she pulled the best out in most of the kids. But for me, there was things that she would, in softball,
I'd be having a bad day, and she'd say, Deb, we need a home run now, home run. So I said, okay. I'd hit a home run. She said, well, now I need a double. Can you hit one down between second and third? I would do it. If she said it, I'd do it. I don't know why, but she had a way with us, the kids.
And while Debbie was hitting home runs, her father, Fred Coe, was serving as the park's second superintendent, having succeeded Jack Mason. Fred ran Frothingham from 1962 to 1972, an exciting and very busy time at the park.
The park was really the center of all the athletic recreation activities in town, really. And all the high school athletics were here, the junior high. Almost any activity you could think of was centered around the park.
However, Fred Coe did put a stop to one activity that was going on in the park.
I snuck into a Little League thing when I was real little, and I was pitching a no-hitter until my father told the coach that I was a girl because I had cut my hair real short to sneak in, because back then you didn't have to sign up.
Easton in the 70s continued the same kind of growth that you saw in the 1960s. 400 or 500 people a year came into town, and the schools increased and grew further and further away from us. Recreation alternatives also began to appear. The golf courses, Borderland State Park, Wheaton Farm, all gave people places to go other than this park.
Until those other recreational alternatives appeared, Frothingham Park had been Easton's main athletic and recreational facility for 40 years. The challenge of staying ahead of 4 decades of wear and tear on the park was taken on by Robert Buddy Worcester, who took over as the park's executive director from Fred Coe in 1972. An English teacher at Oliver Ames, he knew Frothingham's situation very well. He literally grew up in the park. His home is still only a couple of doors away.
Buddy Worcester's done a spectacular job. The park is aesthetically gorgeous. The play area for the young children, the tennis courts, the basketball court, everything is so well maintained.
It's just so well cared for. Buddy deserves a lot of credit. I mean, it's beautiful. I think there've only been 3 directors, haven't there? Jack Mason, Fred Coe, and Buddy.
That's right.
I didn't know Jack Mason. He was before my time. See, I'm not as old as those guys.
Not visible to many of the park's visitors in 1972 were the serious problems caused by years of service to the people of Easton. How these problems were handled would go a long way toward determining the park's future. In the midst of this situation, Frothingham's leadership was changing. John Ames, a state representative for Easton in the 1970s, succeeded Elise Ames Parker as president of the park. A great-nephew of Mrs. Frothingham, Ames realized there was an immediate need for a plan to improve conditions in the park. In what turned out to be an important move, Ames contacted Shep Williams, a landscape architect from Easton, who was about to begin a labor of love.
I first got involved with the work in the park when John Ames asked me if I would contribute to assisting them in developing a master plan for the future use of the park and helping them with a number of the remedial problems that existed: drainage problems, grading problems, diseased trees, and general overuse from the heavy use that had taken place here in the 60s. And John asked me if I would be involved, and since it was my park, the park that I grew up with, it's hard to say no. I said yes.
Williams, who played Little League baseball and football for Oliver Ames in the park, brought new ideas for how different areas of Frothingham should be used. His vision included changes in the playground area.
The old playground was essentially developed to a different mentality. It was a mentality, an athletic mentality, where there were rings, there was a ladder. It was really the first step in moving on to high school sports here. It didn't really service the younger kids. It didn't service the 3, 4, 5. So it was decided to take that material out, which was well worn, and replace it with something more suitable to a younger group.
Go into the playground area today, and you see from the smiles why it has become one of the most important parts of the park. More than anyone, since John Lee laid out the park's design in 1929, Shep Williams is responsible for the beautifully landscaped setting of Frothingham Park that we all enjoy today.
When it was first built, it was really the recreational facility for the town. And it's evolved over the years to become less of that, as we all know, and more of a park. So that's really the overall goal, is to make Frothingham Park a park rather than just purely a playground. The main walk through the park was 12 inches away from the track. There was a little strip of 12 inches of grass. There was an annoyance, visually it was an annoyance to maintain. So we began to rethink about those things and developed a more like park-like walk through the facility. The next phase is to try to work something in for the elderly. There's never really been an elderly use here, and there'll be an elderly housing facility nearby. So we're going to be thinking about those facilities.
The beauty of Frothingham Park has inspired renowned local artist Mary Bodio, who has made Easton the subject of much of her work.
Frothingham Park is a wonderful place to paint because so many memories go into it, as well as all the uses we've made with all my family. I knew I wanted to get the most important features, which were the ballpark, the tennis courts, the children's area, the rock with the monument on it. We decided to keep those as the focal point because we couldn't put too many things and it would be confusing, but we wanted to capture the most important parts for that people remember who have played here and come here to play and have enjoyed all through the years.
After their 1972 season, the Oliver Ames track team left the park for facilities at the high school on Lothrop Street. The Tigers called Frothingham's track home for more than 20 years, winning 2 state championships here. Val Moscato coached track for 4 seasons. He also ran Hockomock League, South Shore Principals, and invitational meets for close to 30 years.
I remember sitting in the stands as a young person, right where the flagpole is, and seeing Bobby Cleary long jump, or see some other competitors pole vault.
Well, the first that I remember was Eddie Meehan. Eddie Meehan held the mile record at 4:23 some odd until Andy Powell broke it. Jimmy Meehan still holds the half-mile record. I don't think it's been broken. One of the early high jumpers that had the record for a long time might still is Alan Bashan. Bunky Manchester was a great sprinter. I guess Ken McAfee was one of the top sprinters in the also. But I remember those people in particular.
Actually, the track itself was one of the best features of the park. It was constructed by the same company that made the track at the Harvard Stadium. Same people put that in here. The thing that makes this distinctive is the fact that it was a 400-yard track rather than a 440, which caused some problems with the 440, the 880, the 220, and so on. But it was an outstanding track, and it still is. It's basically built to last, and the upkeep was minimal, and the people that came here always enjoyed running on the track.
Just off the northeast corner of the track, in the shade of some maple trees, there is a tribute to the trustees who helped make the park and Frothingham Memorial Hall special places in so many people's hearts. On September 23, 1978, 2 plaques were unveiled honoring Mary Frothingham, Mrs. Elise Ames Parker, John S. Ames Jr., and David Ames. David Ames's son, David Ames Jr., who had become president of the park in 1976, gave the dedication remarks. Sitting between Mrs. Parker and David Ames at the ceremony was Doug Porter, the park's treasurer since 1962. He served for 38 years until his retirement in December 2000. And as the 70s came to a close, one Frothingham Park tradition ended and another began. After 28 years, the Little League departed in 1979 to play their games at Militia Park. And the Oliver Ames High School class of '79 became the first to hold their graduation ceremonies in the park.
such an absolutely beautiful setting for such a beautiful ceremony. And we've had every outdoor graduation here, with the exception of 1 year when it got rained out. In 1984, we had like 13 straight days of rain. And the track created a moat. And Duncan Oliver, who was principal at the time, and I came down at 6 o'clock in the morning to check out the park. And Duncan said to me, Sue, put your foot in the park, see how deep it is. Like an idiot, of course I followed his instructions. He was my boss, and here I was up to knee-high water. One of the parents of one of the students who was going to graduate that day came to the park as well, and he said, let's call the fire department. We called the fire department. They pumped out the track. We had to create little bridges over the track in order for the kids to get from one side to the other and not get full of cindered mud, basically. And we held graduation that afternoon at 2 o'clock.
On July 4th, 1980, Frothingham Memorial Park celebrated its 50th anniversary. A parade of antique cars seemed fitting transportation for two old-timers teams arriving for a golden anniversary game. Buddy Worcester, the park's executive director, came out of his baseball retirement and had a pretty good game.
I did get a couple of hits and made a few double plays. Others present were Nick Carter, Connie Splain actually oversaw the game, and Tony Viera, Tony Baxter, Bill Baxter, Harold Craig, Clyde Craig, most of the ones that had played in the Twilight League during the 30s and before the war. You seemed very good, especially if I got a hit. And we won.
Another team that won its final game in the park said goodbye in 1983. A 9-0 win over Shepherd Hills brought 43 years of Oliver Ames varsity football in the park to an end. The varsity was moving to Valentine P. Moscato Stadium on the grounds of the high school. The junior varsity would follow 3 years later, and in the fall of 1988, there was no football in Frothingham for the first time since the park opened in 1930.
One of the great things that we lost when we had to go to night football was the fact that we had to leave Frothingham Park because this is a private park. They didn't want to put lights up in the park, and so we had to build our own stadium to stay consistent with the Hockomock League. And that was a sad time leaving here.
While football, field hockey, tennis, and track left the park for the new high school, Oliver Ames baseball remains and still calls the park home today.
The Oliver Ames baseball was definitely something special. And not so much just for being a part of an Oliver Ames team, but I can remember all the visiting players as well as the visiting parents and fans commenting on what a great field it was. So it was definitely, I think in high school, the best baseball diamond that we played on, and best in the Hockomock League without question. To the visiting team fans, they always comment about the trees.
Rule to that tree?
You generally play it like a wall. If it touches the tree at all, it's not a catch. But if it bounces off the tree, you have to go get it. It's almost like the green monster at Fenway Park.
What positions you play?
Catcher. That's why I'm not catching anymore.
In the 80s, signs of Frothingham's transition from being heavily involved in school sports to more of a town recreational facility could be found in every corner of the park. The tennis courts were so busy the recreation program tennis tournament had to be moved to Stonehill College. By 1983, use of the basketball court had increased by 50%. The Girls' Summer Basketball League played games there. Just a few yards away, more and more young couples with their children were making use of the playground. While on the cinder track, the early morning and evening became the rush hours for joggers and walkers. By 1988, those joggers and walkers had turned the track into the most frequently used part of the park. By the 1980s, Frothingham Hall was no longer being actively used.
Having served as a social center, a part of the war effort, and helping to meet the town's critical need for classroom space, the Frothingham Memorial Hall was about to enter a new chapter in its service to the town by joining the Y.
The relationship between the Frothingham and the YMCA came about very naturally, actually. I was a member of the board and a trustee, and we did not have, as I was also the director of the YMCA, and we did not have a large presence in Easton. And in discussing this with Buddy Worcester, the activities at Frothingham Hall had diminished some, and we had need for facilities for daycare and youth activities. And so we sat down and worked out an agreement, and it's been a wonderful agreement. This was really the forerunner of what is today a very successful YMCA program that is serving hundreds of kids and literally hundreds of families.
Nice move, now shoot it. Nice move.
I've had the opportunity to read the historical background of the Frothingham family and of Mrs. Frothingham's commitment to young kids. I mean, it was just a natural fit. She had a love for kids, and the Y has a love for kids, and you know, we just got to do what we love to do together, and you know, it's a beautiful legacy that extends, you know, God, the past 20 some odd years.
This is a home away from home for a lot of kids. The kids recognize this as a safe place, a place to go do when they're in trouble. We have a lot of kids, you know, throughout the time the fight breaks out down in the neighborhood. We're just teenage kids. They'll come here because they know they're safe and we'll take care of them. And it's like a lighthouse around the place that kids can come and feel safe and be taken care of.
By 1990, Easton's population had grown to 19,800. And everywhere you looked, it seemed there were new houses going up and new roads being built. The Huskies, who've called Frothingham Park home for half a century, were winning Cranberry League, State, and New England regional titles under the leadership of Bobby Worcester, who is now coaching the team he and his dad once played for.
It's a lot of fun knowing that he played for him a long time ago. After I got released from minor league baseball and came back here, they asked me to coach the team. Connie Splain did. But I inherited a good baseball team. I've been coaching since 1985. We've won the state tournament 7 times since late 80s, 7 times in the 90s, and we've been to the World Series at Battle Creek, Michigan once in 1998.
At Frothingham Memorial Hall, the Y was proving to be as big a hit as the Huskies. Hundreds were taking advantage of the wide array of programs being offered, so many, in fact, that the hunt was on in Easton for even more space. In 1996, the Old Colony Y renamed their Easton Center the Old Colony Y Frothingham Family Division to recognize the contribution of the corporation that runs the park and the hall in their success.
The corporation provided the absolute tools for us to do what we do. Y emphasis is really program, but you can't run program without having a facility. The future is right here in our hands. It's about kids, it's about the Y, it's about their life, it's about the Frothingham Memorial Corporation and how together we can make this community the kind of place that we all want to live and grow our families in.
For those of you who might not recognize them, ladies and gentlemen, Dale and the Duds. Their concerts and others are part of the Easton Recreation Program that brought hundreds to the park beginning in the 90s to hear their songs under the stars.
If you sit up at Critics' Corner and oversee the setting of the park, you see a family with a blanket and a picnic dinner. You see little kids running around the bases. You just see people having a wonderful time in a gorgeous setting.
The transition that began in the 80s was continuing in a big way as the park expanded. Despite a tight budget, the 1 acre of land where the Foster Building Center once stood could not be passed up. In 1998, it was acquired for $90,000.
Taking down the old lumber buildings, I mean, that really dresses it up unbelievably.
It sure does.
And because that tended to be an eyesore, and it certainly isn't anymore.
While work was beginning on the addition to the park, the baseball diamond was getting the attention it needed to remain in tip-top shape, and the playground area was getting new equipment. thanks in part to a very generous donation from Doug King, a longtime friend of the park.
There are plenty of challenges and opportunities as we enter the 21st century. I'm thinking about my Aunt Minnie and what she would think of the many changes that have occurred since her death in 1955. I think she'd be proud that despite all the growth and change that's occurred in Easton since opening day in 1930, that the park and the hall continued to benefit the citizens of Easton just as she had intended. However, I'm sure that she would be telling us that there's more that we should be doing to keep up with the needs of our changing town.